citizen.
Out of many
We are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we bring you amazing solutionaries. While so many programs devastate us with all the problems of the world, we focus on solutions. How can we, the people, build the planet and future we choose? And today, I have some very special guests. I have Liz Mangual and Bob Kanegis. And if you notice the resemblance of last names, that's because he's my cousin. But he's much more than that. He and Liz run Story Connection, and it's a program in New Mexico. They travel the world telling stories that celebrate the intersection of myth and family and culture. And they have traveled the world telling life-affirming stories, but they've also returned from an incredible trip to Morocco. And I think I'll actually, just a moment to introduce them. I will share screens just a second here and show you their wonderful website, because I think it gives a great introduction. In a world where kids read, explore, listen, imagine, create, speak, stories come alive. Join Bob Kanegis and Liz Mangual in the superpower of the storyteller. And as you see, they've had they returned from a magic carpet ride to Marrakesh International Storytelling Competition. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Liz Mangual and Bob Kanegis.
Hi, Arthur. Hi, everybody who's
hello, Arthur.
tuned in here live.
Hello, everyone.
And people who might tune in later. Hi.
Hi.
Good. Well, welcome. I think from the beginning, sitting around the campfire, people were storytellers. And I think the key thing we're going to be talking about today is the power of stories. What do you see as the power of stories as being central to the evolution of society?
You started with a big question there, Arthur. Well, should I
Sure.
hold forth here?
Sure.
Well, there's so many different ways to answer this, and academics might answer it in a different way. There's I forget his name, but someone has said that we are Homo narrans, Narrans. It's storytelling that makes us unique. So it's easier for me to just answer in a very, very personal way, which is that when we are with other folks, particularly live and in person, it just seems like an incredibly powerful way to connect directly. And there's a wise one said, if I tell you my story, you're going to listen for a while and then you're probably going to fall asleep. But if I tell you my story, and as you listen to my story, you begin to hear your story, you're going to wake up. And so what storytelling does is it helps us wake up to our own stories and each other's stories. And I think we could go on for the entire hour with an answer to that question, Arthur, but we are constantly banging the drum and trying to live the life that storytelling is a way to be with people in a very special way.
I love that answer, because I think it's so true that as we're hearing stories, we connect to our story, and that's when the story starts to resonate with us, and we start to feel the parallels, and then we feel drawn into their story because it connects to ours. That's why I guess in the hero's journey story arc that Joseph Campbell talks about, it always starts with home and returns to home, because that's sort of our connection to take us on that journey. What you said about a personal story, it also, I'll tell you my personal story on that, and that is that I was working very hard in Washington, D.C. with a group of retired admirals and generals, and with Paul Newman to try to stop the nuclear arms race. And we had some major impact working with the day after and so on. but I began to realize that, like I would help write testimony that Admiral Iraq would deliver to Congress, that Paul Newman would deliver, and the facts and figures and so forth we were citing weren't having traction. They weren't solving things. And I began to realize, it's really the power of story that changes things. And that's when we were working with The Day After and with the story that, had a major impact. None of the facts and figures convinced Ronald Reagan to get off the path of heading toward actually thinking he could fight and win a nuclear war, as his generals were telling him he could, and they were egging him on. But when he saw that story and resonated with it as here's a family and how it impacted him, he got nightmares. He decided he had to turn around the arms race and started major negotiations that vastly ended up reducing the number of nuclear weapons. Now leaders have forgotten that. They maybe need a new story to give them a kick in the butt. But in my personal life, that's when I shifted from trying to do facts and figures to trying to do storytelling, and moved to New Mexico to work on storytelling with BULLYPROOF and then storytelling with the movie, because I realized people are more moved by stories than they are by all the most convincing facts and figures. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. Storytelling or stories, or someone has said that I wish I could attribute these to particular individuals, but these are ideas that have stuck with me. But it's like the ultimate high impact, low tech technology, and I think it's true. Just recently, we had a conversation with a kindergarten friend of mine just a few days ago. August Sabini, and he grew up in an intentional community in the late 40s and early 50s, and he was my classmate when they did duck and cover, when we were doing duck and cover drills in the 50s, and all the kids from Skyview Acres were refuseniks. They were little second, third, fourth, and fifth grade refuseniks. They refused to, their parents wouldn't let them duck and cover. And the way part of the rationale I had heard was that they felt that they didn't want their kids buying into a war mentality. And I asked Augie when he visited the last time, I said, did you understand that when you were, 7 and 8 years old? I mean, how did you know what you were doing? And then he told me a personal story. And he said that during that time, his community, there were a group of women who were victims, but survivors, badly burned women from Hiroshima who came for operations in the United States, and they stayed with the families in Skyview. And so as a 7 and an 8 year old, he had personal interactions with these women. The horrors of nuclear war became very personal, and he's been a lifelong, peacenik ever since. And others. One of my kindergarten classmates from that period went on to found Musicians Without Borders in the Netherlands right now. So so personal stories and experience related that way. Yeah, it's unbelievably powerful.
Well, your story of duck and cover, of course, resonates with my story. It brings to mind that when I was in school, my parents never told me not to duck and cover. They didn't have anything to do with that. But I refused to duck and cover. I said to the teachers, I'm not going to do that. Have you seen the pictures of Hiroshima? I mean, we're in Washington, D.C. This building's not going to be here. What do you mean get down under our desks? That's, and so she sent me to the principal's office, and I, said the same thing to the principal. And I actually, Peace Pilgrim stayed at our house. We had Peace Pilgrim who had walked 50,000 miles for peace, 25,000 then, but she kept walking the rest of her life. And we have her old shoes, but she walked with no money, no support, just on faith, and spoke about peace everywhere. And so I actually brought her to our school and took her around to different classes, asked the teacher, could she speak to the class? And she did. And I got sent to the principal because, you're not really allowed to bring unauthorized visitors in and just take them around to speak to all the classes. But so I resonated with your story of the kids. And I think that is so crucial that we tell stories and resonate. I wonder, Liz, does the discussion we're having bring any story to mind that you'd like to share of either some people you've interacted with or your experiences?
Well, I don't have the history that the two of you have had with the political involvement in that way in consciousness, but it's so many of the stories that Bob and I tell are not just the personal stories, but they are the stories that come from mythology and folklore, and so it gives us an opportunity to kind of tap into world stories and how they might have an impact on the listener. So stories have a way of landing for people in certain ways, and in how we choose those stories and present them to people who will be the listeners of the stories are as powerful and can have as much impact as the personal stories that we tell of ourselves. And so I just wanted to add that piece because I know we're talking, and stories, they are powerful. They're powerful because every single day, how we live into the stories of our own lives, right? And just being aware, and that's what storytelling has done for me, and that's how it's had a power for me, is that it has helped me see that I have a choice of how I weave my own story every day, and how then my story interacts with the rest of the world and the people that I work with, and they are choices. Words are choices that we use, and I don't.
Well, let me jump off from that, Arthur, if we can continue a little bit. We were before we started, we spoke a little bit about our idea that everybody has two great stories. The story of me, on my own favorite subject, I admit it. The story of me and the story of we.
The story of we.
When the story of we is the bigger story, and where those two stories intersect. That's where I don't know, that's where community happens. That's where relationship happens. And that story of we not only includes your life, everybody who's listening, all our lives and our interactions, but that story of we also includes the legacy of our families, of our cultures, the myths, the legends, the folk tales that have meaning for us. That's all part of the story of we. So that's the interesting place that we like to inhabit, where all that comes together.
That intersection of story and culture is so beautiful. So Liz, did that bring to mind a story to you?
But here's a funny story. I mean, I've been focusing a lot on bilingual stories because I grew up speaking Spanish when I was growing up in New York City with my family, who always spoke Spanish at home. So so this is a story. And this is a story for children, but it's really for all ages.
But before Liz tells the story, I just want to preface it a little bit, because when Liz speaks about being a bilingual storyteller, okay, that's two languages. Okay, so she tells to an audience that she's telling in Spanish, she's telling in Spanish and English, but she does it in such a way that she is really celebrating, and she brings the audience in, who speaks other languages, what are the languages that you spoke, and really celebrates the power of all languages. And this is the story she's going to tell you is just sort of one way she does that.
Well, of course, it's celebrating all languages. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and that's really the motivation for for my telling bilingual stories is to celebrate all languages and all cultures. And so once there was una mamá ratón, a mother mouse. She was walking with her ratoncitos, her baby children, across the field. It was a beautiful spring day as it is out here today. I don't know how it is over there, but it's beautiful here. And they were just having a wonderful stroll across the field when suddenly, when they came to the other side of the field, a big cat jumped out from behind the tree and said, meow. And well, what do you think? Do you think that Mamá Ratón was afraid of that big cat?
I don't think so.
I see a nod yes and a nod no. Well, Mamá Ratón stood up straight and she looked him right into those red eyes with the sharp claws sticking out and said, ruff, 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 ruff. When the cat heard that ruffing, he turned around and ran off as fast as he could. Mamá Ratón turned to her little ratoncitos and said, ¿Ves, niños? Ahora saben la razón de hablar un segundo idioma. Now you know the power of speaking a second language.
I love it.
And that was a very short version of the story, but
well, that's true. When we speak another language, we have impact. And it's interesting that the stories intersect in two ways. That is, the stories intersect in that they can build relationships. Like you could build a relationship between the mouse and the aggressor cat, and the cat could become its friend, or build a power relationship. And somehow there's a balance of both, which are necessary to resolve conflicts. If it's always the soft side, you end up getting over dominated. But if it's always the hard side, you head toward what we're heading for in the world, kind of war and nuclear extinction. So it seems like the stories can bring a balance to the two sides of how that mouse from one culture interacts with that antagonistic cat from another. Do you have stories that go both ways on that?
What I thought of was actually our good friend Joe Hayes. I think you've met Joe, Arthur.
Yeah.
One of the wonderful, great storytellers of the Southwest. He tells a story called Soft Child, and it's about the rattlesnake and how and why the rattlesnake got its venom and its bite. But the way that he tells that story is very much about, the rattlesnake had and has a soft nature, but had to defend himself because he was bullied basically by a rabbit in this story. And it's a cautionary tale that basically says that we can live together. It's good to be to find a way to live together in balance and with respect. And we also have to protect ourselves. And that's one story that really comes to mind.
Well, that's a good lead into the storytelling work you did with us when I was back in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we developed the BULLYPROOF program that used a series of 10 animal characters to teach kids to have stories that taught kids how to handle conflicts in more powerful ways than violence. Maybe you'd like to say a little bit about the BULLYPROOF program and the incredible impact it had when you were working with kids in detention centers and schools and with gang kids with this program.
Well, I'll get started, and perhaps Liz will jump in. I mean, as you know, Arthur, it went through many iterations and phases from the rap and roll BULLYPROOF opera that you did with gang members to the puppet plays, and then was work in elementary schools. Really kind of pioneering work. It was a little bit before online bullying became such a problem for us. After you and Molly moved down to Mexico, we incorporated more storytelling into it. We were working with everybody. You might find it interesting. We took the core of the BULLYPROOF program and looking for alternatives to violence to work with incarcerated teens. This was an evolution of BULLYPROOF when we went to work at YDDC, the Youth Detention Center, which we were working with kids who created some pretty serious havoc, and it was from medium security to maximum security. When we started, we told a story that is from Ethiopia, and I'll just kind of give the gist of it. And actually, people there, this is always kind of a weird thing to try and do this on a Zoom call. But there was a king and a queen. They were very powerful. They were very rich. They were sitting on the balcony of their palace one day, drinking some honey, drinking their tea. The king picked up his honey dripper, and one drop of honey fell on the windowsill, overlooking the plaza down below. The queen said, "Dear, you just dropped some honey on the sill. Maybe we should do something. Maybe we should clean it up." "It's not our problem," said the king. It was a hot day. That drop of honey began to slowly drip down off the sill. It hit the pavement below, and a fly landed and did what flies like. It began to lick up some of that honey. A moment later, a lizard saw the fly, pounced on it, ate it. There was a neighborhood cat. The cat saw the lizard, and that looked like a good meal. So the cat jumped on the lizard, ate the lizard. And then a dog came out, saw the cat. The dog and the cat began to fight. Up above, the queen said, and you can all join here, there's a dog and a cat fighting down below. My husband, this is all our parts. Maybe we should do something. And the king said, "It's not our problem." So the cat and the dog continued to fight. And there are cat lovers and dog lovers in the world. And well, the owner of the cat came out and saw what was happening and began to beat on the dog. And the owner of the dog came out and began to beat on the owner of the cat. The queen said, "Maybe we should do something. Two of our subjects are fighting down below. It's not our problem." Dog lovers, cat lovers came out. Pretty soon the dog lovers were fighting the cat lovers. "Maybe we should do something. It's not our problem." So now there was just about a general riot going on. So they had to call out the guard. The guards came out, but even soldiers there are cat lovers and dog lovers. And so some of the soldiers took the cat lover's side, and some of the soldiers took the dog lover's side. And now there was a civil war going. And before long, a cannonball went flying through the air, banged into the castle, turned it into rubble, and the king and the queen crawled out. And the king turned to the queen and said, "Dear, maybe that little drop of honey was our problem after all." So that's one of the first stories that we told to these, very tough kids who were sitting there the first few days with their arms crossed, wondering what the heck they were doing, listening to stories. What did that have to do with alternatives to violence, why they were there, et cetera, et cetera. There was one girl, I think after all these years, I can name her. Her name was Nancy. And we were afraid that Nancy was she was a sort of a negative peer leader. She had the ability to completely subvert that program. She heard that story, and we literally watched her sit up like a rubber band snapping when she heard that story. in fact, she even used the term later when we talked to her about it. She said, I snapped to that story and I realized why I was there, why I was locked up. She said, it was at a high school football game and a tiny little argument broke out. And one thing led to, one small thing led to another, which led to another, which led to another, which led to my very violent act. And that's why I'm here. You just told my story. I want to tell that story. And she got permission then to go to all the cottages in the facility and tell that story. So that all came out of the BULLYPROOF program, Arthur, when we were looking for stories that were alternatives to violence, for how small things become big, how small things become big things. I guess we use the power of originating otter to come up with new ideas, new ways to new solutions, different ways to approach problems.
Otter is now originating orangutan.
Oh, that's right.
All right, so I'll share that.
Bust out there. Let's just break away from the conflict. Take a breath and take some time. Find a solution.
Understanding unicorn. Understand what makes a bully tick.
Listening links. We talk about listening a lot as almost the most important part of storytelling. Listen with your heart as well as your ears. Really find out what's happening with the person who's doing the bullying behavior. What's going on there?
Loving lion, love the doer, but not the deed. So try to really connect with that person so that you can love them and see beyond what's being presented to you.
Yeah, yin and yang, balance as well. Balance, opportunities in crisis.
Picturing purpose, picture your own happy ending. That's where you use the power of imagination, where storytelling comes into play.
Yeah, ask me about picturing purpose when we're done with this, Arthur.
Sure.
Respectful raven, respect your opponent, yourself, and Mother Earth.
So now, originating orangutan, originated win-win way. So that's what you were talking about before, Arthur. Some of the stories, find a way, find the stories that don't have just the usual, just strength overcomes.
Overseeing owl, overseeing the chaotic fray from a wider vision, a wiser way. Again, that's, I think, also the power of being able to use your imagination and seeing different ways of looking at what the situation is.
And fearless fox. So come from a place of strength beyond fear. I mean, fear is real, but understand that you can get beyond it and turn it around.
And that's what the little mouse did, right?
That's exactly. So just back to
that's creativity. When you're confronted with something that's so dangerous, and that little mouse was mother mouse was able to use her creative channel, her creativity.
She was an originating. She was also an originating orangutan.
Right.
Hey, just back to picturing.
Okay.
A minute, Arthur. Just the power. Maybe back to the power of storytelling. The power of storytelling a little bit. The power of imagination. That was in that little in your introduction when we were talking about the superpowers of the storyteller. Imagination is one that we talk about with kids. George Bernard Shaw, 100 and something, a little over 100 years ago, said, imagination is the beginning of creation. We imagine what we desire, we will what we imagine, and at last we create what we will. And so it's a combination of imagination with willpower and the actual work to get things done. And
Wow, you had the magic carpet ride to Marrakesh. Tell us about the intersection of your storytelling with other storytellers in your network.
No, one thing I want to just correct on that is that I did not have an opportunity to go because of my mother, who, just for those of you who don't know, my mother got a had a stroke last October. So, which, you know, after having our plans to go to Morocco together, I had to stay behind to attend to her. So,
Yeah, so it's,
yeah. So Bob he came back with stories of his wonderful trip there. So,
the first thing about Morocco, so just the context, 80 storytellers from around the world, 30, some of them were from Morocco, a few of the remaining Moroccan masters and their students, and the rest of us were from India, from Britain, from Africa, a few of us from North America, South America. I just can't even begin to describe what it's like to be with 80 people who are just, and we all got there under our own power. We were all volunteers. We went there because we love stories. Many of us met during the pandemic through meetings like this. You could feel the intention of this incredible community of tellers who are working all different ways, in their ways to, I would say, although many would not have known the term, people were working, these storytellers are all involved with tikkun olam, the repair of a broken world through stories. And then there was Marrakesh itself. One night, I just love to tell this story. It's like the one story I find myself telling over and over and over again. Usually I probably got lost in the souks and the small little alleyways in the old Medina, the walled city. I can't tell you how many times I got discombobulated. So one night after a grand welcoming feast, I took a taxi at 1 o'clock in the morning to the area of the Medina where I was staying at a guest at a private house. And I said to the taxi driver, I gotta walk, you know, this way, that way, and this way from here. I'm a guest at a private residence here. Taxi driver turned to me with this big old smile and he said, "You're in Marrakesh. You're everybody's guest here." And the spirit of hospitality in Marrakesh was just phenomenal. The feeling of welcome. You'd go to buy a $3 trinket, souvenir trinket, and be offered tea to sit down in no hurry. Wish we're drinking some Moroccan tea that I brought back right now. This Morocco had this incredible feeling of welcome, of tolerance. One story that just to kind of bring us back to the larger subject here. We went to a small town called Essaouira, which is on the coast, on the Atlantic coast. They had a very large Jewish population there. There's still a Jewish population there. It's a wonderful 16th century synagogue called the House of Memory. While I was there, one of the stories I heard, and that I just literally this morning sort of got online and did some research about, was towards the beginning of World War II, when the Vichy government, the fascist-loving Vichy government was running things in Morocco. Vichy asked King Mohammed, Sultan Mohammed V, to round up all the Jews, and they would have been sent off. And after a little bit of time, Mohammed answered Vichy and he said, "Sir, I have searched all throughout the kingdom of Morocco, and I have found absolutely no Jews, just Moroccans." And he refused to cooperate. So Arthur, I think that is so resonant with the idea of a world citizen beyond boundaries, beyond categories. It was very palpable, that feeling of acceptance, tolerance. It was wonderful. I mean, believe me, I can go on and on for hours about Marrakesh. I've been dreaming about Marrakesh every night since I returned.
Wow. Yeah, we had beautiful experiences when we were there too, and I love what you mentioned about we're all guests, and we're all guests on planet Earth. I mean, as you travel the world, it's amazing the hospitality you find opening up in various places. Maybe Liz, you could tell us a little bit about that through Latin America.
For me, it's just using a story that you think it only comes from your part of the world, and then you learn that story also, there's a version of that story that comes from their part of the world. So
How many times when you sing a song?
A song like
Yeah.
arroz, arroz con leche se quiere casar con una muchacha de la capital. And I grew up hearing my mother sing that song, and I've used it in some of my storytelling programs. And then I learned that someone from Venezuela also grew up hearing that song, or from Mexico, or so.
And I get to observe this when Liz is telling that story, and I get to see, as an audience member looking around, I get to see people's faces light up. I get to see the joy with children and adults when they're here in the United States, they're immigrants, and suddenly they hear someone speaking their language or talking about a food that they're familiar with, or a song. They light up.
That's what I was going to say, that within the stories, if you share a little bit about yourself, of your own culture, some of your own traditions growing up, and whether they be stories or food or songs, you find that people from other parts of Latin America have some similar traditions. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking with a woman who was from Cuba at a school, and she, I was talking about food. I mentioned something about rice and beans, and she said, rice and beans. I said, I'm going to go home and make frijoles negros, right? Black beans. And then she shared her version of a recipe for black beans. In fact, I wrote it down so that I can make a version of black beans at home. So there's just a lot that we probably have a lot more in common than we don't as human beings on this planet. And
oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about the intersection of a story from one culture relates to almost the same story in another. Whenever I talk to tech support people from all over the world, India, the Philippines, China, everywhere, I try to make it a personal experience, because here I have this wonderful opportunity to talk to somebody in another part of the world. So I'm chatting with this Microsoft tech from India. From China. I'm talking to her in Shanghai. She's in Shanghai, and we're talking. And I asked her how her weekend was, and she said, "Well, I had the weekend off because I went to see my family, because this is a special holiday in China where we celebrate and tell stories about the people who've departed, about the dead." And I said, "Oh, that reminds me of the Day of the Dead here in Mexico, where I am." And she said, "Oh yes, I saw that movie Coco. It was so wonderful. It's exactly the same as our. It's exactly the same as our. The name of the festival she mentioned there in China. I wish I could speak Chinese a little bit and tell you the name, but sure we could look it up. But she said she resonated with that. So she so resonated with the movie Coco, and that warmed my heart in two ways, because for one, that's that, as you said, the intersection of culture around the world, but it also affirms what my belief is, that if we want to change the world, the most powerful way we can tell stories is through movies and films. I mean, here's a movie sharing the culture of Latin America with China.
That's right.
Yeah, movies and film for me is always food and stories.
And music.
Traditions, cultural traditions are really interesting, because that's a really nice way to move into, people are curious. They want to know about other people's cultures. And so when you share something about your own traditions, that reminds me of, and my abuela or my grandmother made this, and I just learned a lot about other people through the stories of traditions and culture, and like you were saying, Arthur, the stories of the Day of the Dead in Mexico, and as it really similar to how it's practiced in China, and she was able to make a connection that way. So yeah, so through films are a powerful
Music.
way. Yeah,
Arthur,
music.
you might remember the feast events that we did in Santa Fe, and then we've.
Oh, yes, Peace
they
was great.
continue-
Tell us the acronym. We love acronyms here.
Yeah, you taught me to think in acronyms, Arthur. Families eating and storytelling together. We also
Woo! Family
of-
eating and storytelling together. Isn't that great? Peace.
and we also think about it as friends and families eating and storytelling together. And we also think about it as families, friends, and foes eating and storytelling together. There's not going to be time to tell it right now, but one of probably the most sacred stories and impactful stories that we know is a story that comes from a little Plinkett village where I lived when I was in my 20s. It's called The Man Who Made Friends with the Bears. And the gist of it, this was the inspiration for the feast events and getting people of different cultures, different backgrounds, different races, different economic situations, people who might never sit at a meal together, was at the end of this story, this man has put on a feast for the bears. Other people don't want to come because they think the bears are humans' enemies. But in the end, the feast happens, and the old man whose name was Kassank 120 years ago told the person who collected this story, from this story that we learned that sometimes it's good to sit down with the people sit down with an enemy or someone you've had an argument with at a meal, because you'll have an opportunity to make friends with them the way that the people made friends with the bears. So that's a story I can't tell formally in a situation like that. It wouldn't be appropriate, but telling about it is the idea that again, following what Liz says, food. So we've got movies, we got music, we've got food and culture, we've got stories, we've got conversations. All this, everything from the lowest tech conversation at a dinner table to a major motion picture,
Right,
are all methods of storytelling that share that basic power to bring people together.
well, now, I can't let the mention of the bear going without asking you, Bob, to tell one of the favorite stories from our own family about Grandpa Lewis.
Hold on a second.
About Grandpa Lewis.
Trying to stay out of the. We're moving with the sun.
Move over. Okay, yeah.
All right.
So tell us about the true story in our family about Grandpa Lewis and the bear.
Oh, yeah.
Well, hey, come on, Arthur. He's your grandfather, although I grew up here. I grew up. Come on, I'll tell you what. You tell the story about the bear, and then I'll tell the story about the oak tree.
Okay, yes, great.
All right.
They're both about Louis. All right, great.
Okay.
So anyway, my grandfather, Lewis, went to, in those days, they had these kind of vaudeville acts. They didn't have TV and everything yet, smartphones or anything. So people would go watch this man would bring a bear around, a 500-pound bear from town to town, and had a muzzle on it and had its nails clipped. And they would challenge people. If anybody could beat the bear, they would win $50. So they could throw the bear, get the bear down on its back. So my grandpa watched and looked a while, and Louis saw how big men would come and they would use all their might, and the bear would always put him down. He never lost. But my grandfather studied the situation and walked up into the ring, took the challenge, and like in less than a minute, he had that bear flat on its back. And the owner said, "Well, I'm not going to pay you the $50. You cheated." And what do you mean I cheated? You tickled the bear. And that's exactly what he did. He got up there and he tickled the bear. He realized from watching the bear move that he was ticklish under his armpit. So he got him into the armpits, got that bear laughing and rolling around on his back, and beat the bear, got the bear on its back. Well, the man refused to pay. So this went to court, and there were newspaper articles about that, and there were cartoons in the local papers about it. It was a big deal, this court case, and Grandpa Lewis won. The judge said, there's nothing in the rules. He said, get him down his back. He didn't say he had to use might. If he can tickle him, great. So for me, that's always been a metaphor for my life and for all my work. That and it's that when you reach something that's just more powerful, this terrible, this seemingly unbeatable foe, tickle the bear. Find this other way. So I love that, and so. With that, I will ask you to please tell the other story about Louis and the oak tree.
If you want a great image, everybody, I think, Arthur, you may have sent this to me. There's a cartoon that's over 100 years old. There's Uncle Louis on all fours down beneath a flagpole, growling, and a bear cowering up at the top of the flagpole.
Yeah, that was one of the cartoon newspaper stories from the time. Yeah.
So the story that Arthur just shared is sort of a seminal story that is so resonant with who Arthur is and who he became and the work that he's done. So I didn't meet my great uncle Louis, escaping pogroms from Lithuania with the family. I didn't meet him until he was 90 years old. And he was in between his last and his next to last retirement. He was still climbing ladders, washing windows at a base. And I went with my father to meet my great uncle Louis for the first time. We were in he walked our legs off, and he was 90 or 91. He walked our legs off. We needed a rest. We stopped in this little small wooded area on the base. And there were some oak trees there. And suddenly Uncle Louis looks at my father and I, and he says, boys, I can't really do his old world accent exactly, but boys, he's calling my father a boy, and my father adored Uncle Louis. Boys, he said, look at these oak trees here. He says, hey, Robbie, look at this young one that's right over there. He says, it's straight, its trunk is straight the way you stand up straight. Feel its bark, it's smooth. And then he took his hand and he rubbed it on my skin. He says, just like a young person's, it's smooth. Feel that smooth bark. He says, now look at that old oak tree over there. He says, it's not so straight. It's kind of bent the way I am. He says, oh, and feel its bark. Oh, he says, feel my skin. It's rough like the bark of the tree. And then he took this very pregnant pause, and he goes, boys, trees and people, it's the same universe. And that has, trees and universe. It's the trees and people. That's the interdependence, the interbeing of all life. And I heard that when I was just getting ready to start my studies in environmental education, and that has always been Faisal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name the correct way, but I see trees behind you. Okay, and we can all, we can all put our hands. We can all put our hands on I can put my hands on a leaf of a house plant here. You could put your hands on the leaf of a tree. We're all connected. It's the same universe. We're all facets on a jewel reflecting each other. It's the same universe.
This is fascinating. I love the just grip. You're on your seat wanting to know the end of the story. I love the honey. That was incredible. And the mouse one, of course. But I have David Gallup would like to jump in. So let's let David talk. Go ahead, David.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bob and Liz. This has been an amazing experience for me to hear about the power of storytelling in our lives to help us to learn and to grow from whether we're just little kids or as adults, and to change our minds. And one of the things that you said that really resonated with me was the power of imagination. Gary Davis used to love to say, to quote Albert Einstein saying, imagination is more important than intelligence. And even Einstein, when he was explaining the theory of relativity, had to tell a story about a train and the light in the train, and someone standing outside the train looking at that, and someone in the train, and how the light would be different. So, but relating it back to Gary, Gary, had to imagine a world where he mattered, because once he gave up his national citizenship and declared himself a world citizen, he, in some respects, became a persona non grata. I mean, he had trouble, obviously, traveling. He had trouble exercising his rights, as the millions of refugees and stateless people in the world do today. So he had to imagine a world that, you know, his rights and duties would be respected. So, like he would say, you know, David, the Wright brothers had to imagine what an airplane would look like and how, you know, how to make it fly before they could actually build it. Gary said when he stepped out of the embassy in Paris, he had to imagine a new world, a legal world, not a world in which he was stateless. He had to create a world in his mind first. And every progress takes imagination. So, for example, he created the world passport in a sense to tell, almost like a story, to tell his story of where I've been, where I want to go, and how I can claim my rights. And I always love to say this, Gary was not stateless, he was world full, meaning he was full of his love for the world.
That's beautiful.
So
Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing, you know, the power of stories.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Wow, worldful. I know, you know, it's funny. I don't think I've ever seen those two words put together just that way. It's so wow,
Yes.
beautiful.
Wow.
That was beautiful. Yes. Yeah, Faisal, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for the lovely evening. Actually, it's quite enjoyable. I have a little story for you guys. It's a story told about my country. I live in Sri Lanka. I'm from Sri Lanka, and we have the story of which comes back from immemorial. You know, it's a tradition. It's an old tradition that Sri Lanka is an island, but the story goes that there was once two islands, a big island and a small island. They suddenly realized that a tsunami was coming. So they did all their calculations, etc., etc., and they just realized that the tsunami was going to hit the small island and leave the big island alone. So they left all the unsmart people on the big island, and they all went to the small island. And of course, they'd made a mistake in their calculation, and so the small island got wiped out, and all we are left with here now are the idiots.
In the Eastern European Jewish tradition, we talk about the Helmites, the village of fools who think that they're the wise ones. You know, the angel who was distributing fools supposedly all over the world got too close to the mountains. The bag of fools ripped open, and they all ended up at Helm. So there are all these wonderful stories of the fools of Helm. But almost every single culture has stories of fools, and we have wisdom traditions, and we have the traditions of fools, and they're of course they're intertwined, and it's really.
We have the festival, right? We have the Festival of Fools all over the world. You know, the Festival of Fools. You know, that's a very important tradition, I think. Everywhere, you know, where we used to have it here as well, but a lot of our traditional stories and actually practices are getting lost now in the globalization rush. You know, well, the traditional people are being marginalized more and more all the time. Which is that's the basis of the work that I try to do here, is trying to sort of find a financial way for the indigenous traditional fishers and farmers to carry on with their lives, because all our culture is based around fishers and farmers, and it's all about fertility and all of those things. So whilst the poverty that these people are being inflicted upon them now, but deliberately by our government, it means that all of these people are getting more and more marginalized and coming into the cities, and with that you get the loss of these traditions, you know, and all of these things. I mean, we have one of the finest fire walking ceremonies in a small fishing village, just about 50 miles from me on the sea, and you know that those guys are getting more and more poor, and if they have to move into the city, then who's going to do the fire walking? You know, probably only tourists. You know, so the whole tradition is getting upside down now. It's very sad.
Are you located there at home?
Yes, I am. That's my front garden. It's a picture of my front garden on my background.
Oh wow!
I'm lucky. I have a traditional farm here. I mean, I practice regenerative agriculture. I have 42 acres of coconut, and I have 34 acres of coconut and 8 acres of an analog forest, which I'm reforesting along the riverside. So I have a river that runs.
Well, thank you for the story, and I definitely want to learn more about your work. It just occurs to me, Arthur, there was one thing that I definitely wanted to, one word I wanted to, get into this conversation. We talked about it before, so I know that everybody who is tuned in here and listening is doing good work in the world. And one of the things that our North Star, our compass, is the concept that comes from South Africa. You may know of Ubuntu, and Bishop Tutu maybe really helped put that word into the common language. But the spirit of Ubuntu is I am who I am because of who we all are together. That's back to the story of me and the story of we. So we're all in this. We're all in this together.
Wow. What a beautiful way to sum it all up. Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so much, Liz. This has been fantastic. Let me go ahead and send it back to Arthur. He's going to take it away.
Ubuntu is a great way to end that, because we have just had our screening on Cape Town television. They just broadcast "The World Is My Country," and the key link there was that in the South African culture, Ubuntu is really a key factor in their whole culture, and so our movie resonates in that way. And it was fun. I'm glad that David Gallup got to share how that connects. When I heard about you having to keep up with Louis, I remember Melanie and I trying to carry our camera equipment and keep up with Gary, and we couldn't keep up. So, yep, he was strong to the end too. And thank you so much for joining us on the People Powered Planet podcast. We hope everyone will come back next week and every week, every Wednesday at the same time, 10 Pacific, 1 Eastern, and various times in Sri Lanka and around the world. We put a world time link right on our webpage at theworldismycountry.com. Just click on the club on the podcast page, or go directly to peoplepoweredplanet.com. And while we're speaking of websites, do go to Bob and Liz's website. It's in the link. It's storyconnection.com, and enjoy that magic carpet ride with them as they tell stories around the world. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Next week's going to be Action Day. Come join us and take action to help, and maybe we can talk about how we can apply some stories to the actions that we need to change. When we want to change the world, we need to change the story.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.